key player out of this, and since you both served in the House, I'd be interested in your comments on this. If you were advising John Boehner, what would you be advising him to do? He obviously has trouble controlling the more conservative elements of his party. How does he get past this?
The House is operating like a parliament for those of you who study civics and political history. Every vote in the House is seen as a vote of confidence for John Boehner and his speakership. If John Boehner, with whom I have a good relationship, were sitting here asking me for my advice, I would tell him to team up with Steny Hoyer, who Leanne and I know well, was the majority whip, now the majority leader when the Democrats were in the majority in the House. He's now the minority whip. He's a moderate, he's a pragmatist. I would urge the Speaker to team up with Steny Hoyer. Each of them could deliver 120 votes. Let's go to work. Let's get immigration reform. Let's get an all-above energy policy. And let's get a grand bargain like Simpson-Bowles, produce a healthier balance sheet for USA Inc. Man, we'd be off and running. Our economy's poised to accelerate anyway. We're 3 deals away from, again, being clearly the leader in the world.
But what do you do if the Tea Party element of your party won't tolerate that?
You say thanks for your input, but we're moving ahead. The country depends on it. It's what happened last night. It's what happened last night.
We have always had extremes in the party. I mean, when I was in Congress, Republicans, Democrats, you always have an extreme element of the party, but you sure as hell don't let the extreme govern. The House has to govern as a body. I mean, that's the key. What I would say to John, and he's a good friend as well, is John, let the House be the House. Go back to regular order. The House, frankly, has gotten a little screwed up, in these last few years.
It doesn't mean the Senate isn't screwed up either.
Well, that may be. But, when I was there, I got elected when Tip O'Neill was the Speaker. And first of all, Tip O'Neill and Bob Michel, who was a Republican, had a great relationship and worked together on issues. But more importantly, Tip O'Neill believed in the process, which means you got a bill, it goes to committee. Subcommittee works on it. The committee works on it. When the committee reports out a bill, it goes to the Rules Committee, and then you send it to the floor, and the body works on it. I mean, Tip O'Neill was Speaker when Ronald Reagan was President. When Ronald Reagan submitted his budget or his tax cut, Tip O'Neill could have pulled, this same kind of stupidity by, shutting the government down, saying, no, we're not going to vote on Ronald Reagan's tax cut. He didn't do that. He said the House has to vote. This is the President of the United States. He's entitled to a vote. And we voted. And Reagan won. But that's okay. It's a majority of the House that makes the decision. So I'd say to John, let a majority make the decision.
Could I offer one?
Yeah, sure.
Maybe 2 quick thoughts. Number one, the President's in his 2nd term. He's now serving not only for us, and by the way, he's our president. I know we all want him to be successful, just like I wanted George W. Bush to be successful, with whom I didn't always agree. John Boehner is not going to serve as the Speaker forever. He's thinking of a legacy. And Harry Reid will tell you in a second, he's getting on as well. And there's a time in your life when you start to think, what are you going to leave behind? Are you going to leave this country better than you found it? So there's an opportunity there for all 3 of those men to be part of this process. On a little bit of a whimsical note, John Boehner loves to play golf. He is very unique, for those of you who play golf. He swings from the right side, but he putts from the left side. And about half your strokes are on the green, and about half are from the full shots. So he ought to be able to go right down the fairway, right down the middle, and get the country there as well.
And I think the President plays golf, too.
The President plays golf as well, so they need more golf diplomas.
Let's turn to Syria for a second. On August 20th of 2012, the President made his now famous speech about a red line in Syria and chemical weapons, basically saying that if the Assad regime used it, that would be a pretense for American intervention in Syria. You have been critical of how he handled that situation once chemical weapons were used. And if I'm correct, what you've said is once you don't have a problem with him drawing the red line, but when you say you're going to do something, you do it. Now, you would have gone ahead and done whatever military action, and you would have bypassed the Congress. I wonder how you feel about that.
That's good. The reason that al-Assad and the Russians came to the table, and we now have a program underway to not only identify and confine those those chemical weapons and destroy them, is because of the threat of the president using force. It got the attention of al-Assad. It got the attention of the Russians. It got the attention of other leaders in the region. The president, in my opinion, when he made that decision, probably should have gone ahead and used that force. But in the end, he handled this, and there's a lot of commentary about whether he got lucky or we stumbled into this. But we're where we are, and I think it all stemmed from the fact that the president said he was going to use force whether he had to go through the Congress or not. And the people in the region took notice. And I think the Iranians should also take notice, because this president has made it clear that when the time is right, whether it's getting Osama bin Laden or leading the Libyan effort or ending 2 wars, he's going to take these steps. You can't question his toughness. Now, I disagree with him on the National Security Agency's overreach, and I think he should have embraced Simpson-Bowles immediately. But I don't think you can argue with the president's toughness and his willingness to use the arrow that's necessary to hit the target.
But as a senator, you would have been okay with the president, any president, bypassing
I think based on what the president said he wanted to do, based on the red line he drew, based on the way in which I know this operation was going to be conducted, and by that it was going to be very narrowly defined, it was going to take a couple of days, I think he should have gone ahead and done what he said he was going to do.
And you would have done this even despite the fact that the polls were overwhelmingly against it.
Let me explain this, because I think it's really an important point. I deeply believe in the president's power as commander-in-chief. I just finished a book on Jefferson, and Jefferson believed that the first responsibility of the president is to preserve the country and to protect it. And he, as commander-in-chief, sent our ships to the Barbary Coast without going to Congress, because he believed he had the power to do that. Look, when a commander-in-chief, makes a decision, I mean, he drew a red line with regards to the use of chemical weapons, and I agree with that red line. Because, frankly, from what we knew, there was an awful lot of chemical weapons that were there in Syria that we were concerned about. And we not only feared their use, but we felt that there was a good chance these weapons could wind up in the hands of terrorist groups, Hezbollah, or whatever. So I agreed with the president and what he did. And I agreed when that line was crossed. And don't forget, we're talking about 1,200 people that were killed by poison gas. 400 kids were killed. That line was clearly crossed. We had the intelligence to clearly prove that had happened. So you've got a red line, it's been crossed, and the president came to the conclusion in a major speech that therefore, because of what had happened, our national security was involved here. Our credibility was involved, and that's why he was proposing limited action. When the United States says we're going to do something, I mean, we've got a red line in Iran. We've got a red line elsewhere. When you set those red lines as a country, whether you agree or disagree with them, then you've got to make them real. You've got to take action when they're crossed. And in this case, we're talking about a limited action. It was going to hit some of the key targets there to try to make clear that Syria ought not...
To you, before we sort of consciously or unconsciously stumbled into this negotiation, which turned out apparently avoided the military strike. But were you in favor of a military strike?
I felt that based, and I've got to be careful with my Intelligence Committee assignment and what I can share with people here combined with my Armed Services assignment.
Were you or not?
And I, based on what I know of the operation that was planned, I would have supported the president if he had made that decision. I don't disagree with the fact or the initiative he then generated to bring the question to the Congress. As you could tell, as an observer, and as everyone in this room knows, this country's war weary. And the hangover, if you will, from the invasion of Iraq and the lack of planning and anticipation for what would happen there, plus the war that I believe we should have fought and are about to conclude, the war in Afghanistan, have left the American people weary and concerned about where our resources are going and to what extent are we over-engaged in the world. And one of the themes I hope we'll touch on tonight is, having said that, we cannot afford to become isolationists. We have to be internationalists. We have to be engaged in the world. It's crucial that we continue to play that kind of a leadership role. Now, a lot of that leadership, and Leon, I think, would agree, comes from having a strong economy, from hewing to our principles, including the Bill of Rights, which is one of the reasons I've been so strongly focused on limiting what the NSA does, particularly when it collects information on Americans. But we will lead as much by example, backed up by our military. So I broadened my comments, but in the end, I was willing to support our Commander-in-Chief in what he decided to do.
What's the red line now? We're in negotiation where we're trying to establish the extent of nuclear or of chemical weapons.
Yeah.
What is the red line now?
Well, Syria is the most vexing foreign policy question I've ever considered. The great game has come to the Levant. You have the Russians there, you have the Iranians, you have the Turks are next door, the Israelis have a stake in this, the Americans are there, of course. Syria is the most diverse of all the countries in the Middle East. It's where World War II was focused in the Middle East. It's where Lawrence, of course, gained great fame. It's where Sykes-Picot was ultimately implemented. So there's a lot at stake in Syria, but in the end, I think we're positioned in the right way given there are no good choices. The goal is to get the parties to Geneva or another capital and negotiate a political settlement. We all want al-Assad to go, but if he were to fall precipitously, the chaos would be unthinkable in Syria, and it would spread into the entire region. So although we deeply dislike him, he's a tyrant, he's an SOB, he's killed his own people, he missed an opportunity to modernize Syria. After all, he's educated in the West, he's a doctor. We want to be thoughtful about how the use of force tied with the use of diplomacy what the results are, because we already have a lot of countries in the region that are struggling, Egypt, Tunisia, to name two. The goal, and again, I want to repeat this, is to husband that situation as much as we can, given we're at arm's length, through providing humanitarian relief, perhaps corridors of safe passage. We could appoint a high envoy to complement what John Kerry's doing. But that's the way forward in Syria.
Let's go back to the red line question,
Yeah.
though. We have the Russians, who are now key players in trying to verify this. Do you trust them?
No.
That, of course, then begs the question.
No, and look, they have close relationship with Assad. They have great interest in what's happening in Syria. And they're going to support Assad. I mean, their goal is to try to, hopefully, from their point of view, be able to back up Assad and be able to keep him in power. Now, they've made the commitment on chemical weapons. I think they've got it's a UN resolution. They're obviously, we have UN teams that are there. And, so far, they've made some progress. But my concern is that Assad starts putting some of this stuff aside and doesn't give it all up.
Which begs the question then is, what is the red line and what's the response? And I ask that because you wonder what is our threshold for being the human rights leader in the nation if this red line keeps shifting? So at what point?
The red line for me, Leon, would be if he uses chemical weapons again, we hit him.
What if it's something less than that, then he's not using them, but he's stockpiling them, as you said, that there's not actually full disclosure and transparency?
The reports have been generally very, very positive when it comes to the extent of what they've declared. Now, we have assets there, and again, I'm going to be careful, my CIA director is sitting here, but we have a lot of information about what's happening on the ground. And so we are going to know at the end of this month when there's a final declaration of how straightforward and how forthcoming they've been. And that will inform what we do. Leon's right. We don't trust the Russians, but that doesn't mean we can't work with them for our purposes and maybe for their purposes as well. That's what diplomacy is. It doesn't necessarily mean we feel good completely about working, particularly with Putin, who has gone way off in a direction I don't,
I think you've got to maintain the threat of force. You've got to maintain the threat of force. The president has to continue to maintain that because if, in fact, this thing goes haywire and we suddenly wind up facing this again, I think it is the threat of force.
It's harder for the
that's gonna
Security
make the
Council.
difference.
I'm sorry, Leon, I'm
Yeah,
interrupting.
no,
but
that's right.
It's harder for the world to turn a blind eye. It's would be hard for the China and the Russians and the Security Council to say, well, no, we signed on to this deal. Putin said he would deliver, and al-Assad said he would deliver, but now they use chemical weapons again. It'd be really hard for them to, even as stubborn as they can be, to resist world opinion.
Your end goal, I presume, with both of them is that Assad is gone.
Yes,
But-
without destroying the infrastructure that's the civil infrastructure that's fragile, and then leaving a failed state.
Yeah, let's,
Right, and I think
let's not kid people, and I think we know that look, Syria is chaotic. I don't know how Syria is going to turn out. Nobody does right now. I mean, there are several scenarios that are going to play out in Syria. One is that country breaks up, like Yugoslavia, and you have Assad going to one section. You've got the opposition going to another section. You've got the danger. The danger, frankly, is Al Qaeda's involved with the opposition, and they may try to establish a base of operations. You've got the Kurds establishing another area. So you could have a breakup of that country. That's one scenario. The other is the scenario that, the opposition is able to ultimately succeed, but the opposition is divided. So who governs there? That's been part of our goal in the United States, is to try to see if we can influence the opposition to exercise the right kind of leadership in that area so that they can help provide for some kind of reasonable transition. The third possibility is that Assad, continues to get support from the Russians, gets support from Iran, and that Assad is able to maintain his position there. That's not out of the question. So you've got several scenarios that could happen in Syria. I think the role of the United States has to be, as a world leader, to try to make sure that we try to influence what happens there in the right direction, working with our international partners.
Let's stay in the region. Iran's new president, Hassan Rouhani, has made some positive gestures to the West. We've had the first discussion with the president in, 20 years or something like that. And just in the last couple of days, there appears to be genuine movement in discussions in Geneva on Iran scaling back its nuclear program. Long way to go, of course, but obviously what they want is they want some sanctions lifted. It's hurting them economically. Of course, on the other hand, you have the Prime Minister of Israel raising real concerns, saying, don't be duped. He's buying time. This is a long-term plan for them. Don't be suckered. And I'm wondering, in both of your cases, where do you think, how genuine is this? Where do you think it's going?
The PM's right. We should distrust but negotiate. We should distrust but verify. The sanctions really are biting. I know many people in this auditorium tonight care about that region, care about Israel. The sanctions have had, up to a significant point, the desired effect. I also believe Rouhani wants a new era in relations with the United States. The question is, can he deliver? That's a very opaque government. Secretary Panetta, Director Panetta, knows all too well. He and I've sat through a lot of briefings on what's happening in Iran, trying to understand their political processes. But you do make peace, you do make agreements generally with your enemies, not with your friends. And we all in this room could imagine the ways in which tension levels would drop in the Middle East if, in fact, Iran came to the table and did the following: full and open inspections at any time. They would relinquish their claim to 20% enriched uranium. We could provide them with that uranium for their medical uses. And perhaps you put on the table that they close Fordow, which is the facility that's armored, if you will, and very, very difficult for us or anybody else to remove that facility. So we've got to be very clear on what our expectations are, and you can't lift sanctions because they offer some half measures or they say the right thing. This has to be verifiable. But look, let's not turn our backs on what seems to be at least a small thawing in a long relationship.
What's your take on how
I think
sincere
the key is to maintain a healthy skepticism here, because Rouhani up to this point is engaged in a PR campaign, and the reality is, I'm pleased that they at least elected somebody who is a moderate leader, and I think he is. But the problem is he's not the leader. The leader is the supreme leader. And frankly, that guy has a very tough view of the United States. And let's not forget, Iran is a country that has spread terrorism throughout the Middle East, that has undermined stability in a lot of the Middle East. They've got the Quds Force, which is basically deployed throughout the world, and now the Quds Force is fighting with Assad in Syria, and so their intentions are not good.
Well, we think about a scenario in which they continue to develop nuclear weapons,
Right.
move closer, and at some point the red line for Israel is we attack. But something takes us back to Syria here, which is in this whole equation, the Syrians said, you attack us, meaning the United States, we attack Israel. Do you think that was a real threat? Was
No.
it posturing? You do not.
No, I mean, I think they're going to say that, and the Iranians are going to say that. But I don't think that's, that's a real threat in terms of a limited attack. It depends, obviously, on what ultimately would happen there as to what they would do. But Syria is right now fighting for their own life. The last thing they need to do is to engage in another war. They're fighting their own war in their home area. But I do think that it is important for us to pursue the negotiations. It's important to try to make sure that that we have limits in terms of their ability to develop their nuclear capability. We have talk about a red line. We have said they will not develop an atomic bomb or an atomic weapon. We've made that very clear. Now, the problem is they're enriching as we're talking.
Right.
They got about 3,000 new centrifuges that are spinning and enriching fuel. And when you enrich uranium to a high level, what it means is it's producing the kind of uranium that you can then use in a weapon. So the more they enrich, the more they're in a position, if they make the decision to do a weapon, to be able to go there on a faster time track. And that's what concerns Netanyahu, and it concerns us as well. So the key is going to be, are they going to be willing to give up their enrichment capability? And that's going to be very tough for them to do. And I think Mark is right. You got to keep those sanctions on until you know for a fact that they've made an agreement to limit their nuclear capability.
Let's stay in the nuclear area for a second. Pakistan, very unstable country, has nuclear weapons. What leverage do we have with Pakistan to try to control certain elements of their government that may just think, let's follow Iran, let's go further?
Both Leon and I made a number of trips to Pakistan to meet with their political leadership, which is weak and corrupt. Can I say that here? I guess I just did.
Anybody hear that?
And their military leadership, which really runs the country. There's an old saying that Pakistan is an army that has a country on the side. And then in particular, the head of their intelligence committee, they've now brought in a new person. I'm curious what Leon thinks about that. There was a man by the name of Pasha who was there, who was one of the most difficult and dare I say deceitful people we've ever had to deal with. But Pakistan has played both the role of arsonist and fireman in the region. They have some 100 nuclear weapons, give or take. I think that's in the public sector, I can say that. But we're again in a situation where we have to engage with them. We have to do all that we can to help empower the civilian leadership. And at the bottom line, Andy, is their economy is flailing, and that leads to a country that's very fragile, that distracts their public by focusing on India rather than the real threat, which is to the west along the Afghan border.
What's the leverage then?
The,
Is it
the
simply
leverage
money?
there are a couple places of leverage. The leverage is aid, and the leverage is the strong military-to-military relationships we have with Pakistan. It's one of the stories you don't hear very often. I think there's some people in this room who follow what we do with our military, but one of the best things we do is our military leaders have strong relationships all over the world through exchanges, through our war colleges and the like. And that's one of the reasons that Pakistan has at least been available to us, wouldn't you say, Mr. Secretary, when it's come to our communiques and our partnership as it is.